Welcome back, folks. Mac T here, and I have been going over a lot of different questions in the Facebook group, and they always a question: is this Ford Edge a good deal? So I'm going to break the Ford Edge down into different categories, and I'm going to start out with the model year 2007 and 2008. And some of you may not know this, but there are actually 2006 model years out there. They were built in 2006, but they were sold in 2007, as the model years usually go. But we're going to start out with the 2007 and the 2008 Ford Edge. Why? Because those are the first 2 years the Ford Edge was even made. And we all have that assumption that the first year or two of a new vehicle introduction is not always good. And there are pitfalls that go with the 2007 and the 2008. Now I'm seeing them selling, $3, $4, $5, $6, $7, $8,000. Depends on what you see and what you get. Depends on the mileage and everything else that goes with it. But there are some pitfalls that I do want you to do, and as any good consumer would do, is you want to check out that Ford Edge and make sure that it is the best deal for you. So some of the things that we got to go over are, of course, the interior of the Ford Edge. That's right, the 2007 through 2008 had pretty much that built-in stereo, the CD player, and all that good stuff. It did not have what we really have known in the next generation as the accessory protocol interface module, which has its own other issues. But we're going to stick with that. And what I did find in my owning a 2008, and other people complained about that use the CD players, the CD player would eventually eat the CDs. It'd make a lot of clicking noises and things like that. So that's something to worry about if you go and buy a used one and it's not really working. The other thing I found in my 2008 is the illumination. Yeah, the screen. Over time, the diodes burned out or whatever is going on with them. You couldn't see the screen very good. So, standard Ford problem there, because I see a lot of other Ford models with that same issue. So that's something there. Now, going further through the Ford Edge interior-wise, then you'd have some other things, maybe not so prevalent, but the shift to park thing with the cable for the parking. You want to check and make sure the indicator is in the prindle, PRNDLE, whatever you want to do, L, as far as checking that out and making sure that it is illuminating on the dash and down when you shift and all this other stuff. So that's something to make sure that you do there. Other things on the interior was like the air conditioner, as far as that working. The 2007s, 8s had somewhat of an issue with the AC in that it wasn't the condenser out in front of the engine more than it was the evaporator under the dash, which is a pricey deal. So if there's leaks and they say it's under the dash, that's going to be thousands of dollars to fix. So you want to make sure that whatever you do, you sort of walk away from that deal. You don't want to have that problem with your Edge. Going on further in there, you got possibly some blend door actuators that fail, that you get hot and cold air through the different sides and everything. That could be an issue also that you want to check out on your 2007, 2008 Ford Edge. Otherwise, standard things you want to check in there, lights and everything else that works. But those are the major issues that you could be running across, other than a door ajar. A door ajar is essentially the door latch mechanism has failed. It'll give you a warning that the door ain't shut. Then you got to replace the whole latchy mechanism. I guess you get it for like $100. I bought one for my 1.5 gen, so they're not that expensive. And you can DIY that thing. You can pull the door apart and replace it yourself. It won't be a problem. But and again, another pitfall when you're looking at a 2007, 2008 Ford Edge. Now going forward, we've done most of the stuff in the cabin. Now we want to leave the cabin. We're going to start looking at some other things that you want to check out. And that means we're going to go and start from the bottom and work up. That's right. We're going to go from the bottom and work up. Wheel bearings, that's right. 2007, 2008 had a wheel bearing issue. they tend to eat up a lot of wheel bearings. There's some problems with the way that the hubs and everything were placed in there, and they can eat up a fair number of wheel bearings. So if you hear a growling noise while you're driving from a wheel, and you're going to buy it used, again, we're talking another $100 or so to replace a wheel bearing. If you do it yourself, $300 to $400 for you to get it paid to get done. So keep in mind, all this adds up when you buy that used Ford Edge. So we're going off of that. The good thing about it is the 7 and 8, they're running 17, 18-inch tires. No brainer. Those are cheap tires to buy, and you want to make sure that you get the right size tires on there and follow that line. But other than that, we got the shocks. That's right. The rear shocks aren't much. They're nothing. They're pretty inexpensive, and they should be changed about every 100,000 miles. You go up and you go to the front struts. Now, the 2007, 2008 went through a lot of strut bearing mounts for me. I went through probably 2, 4, 6 of them overall in my time driving it. So, strut bearing mounts tended to fail, and it wasn't necessarily the struts, it was the strut bearing mounts. So that's something. If you hear a thump, thump, thump up in the front while you're driving, then you know that during your test drive that is probably a strut bearing mount that is bad, especially if it's got over 100,000 miles on it. I had some fail as early as 30 or 40. So buy the OE Motorcraft, you'll be all right on that. Going up through your Ford Edge, then you got the struts, you got all that. Lower control arms aren't necessarily a problem. Power steering, yes, power steering hoses. High pressure line tends to burst and lose a lot of power steering fluid. So check underneath for leaks on the power steering hose, and make sure that high pressure line, that banjo fitting, all that ain't leaking. If it is, that's going to be about another $200 fix on top of your tab when you buy it. And then power steering rack, yeah, you want to check that, make sure it's not leaking out the boots or anything like that. And if you do, again, just the rack itself is going to cost you $200 to $300 for a OE Motorcraft steering gear, as they call them. So you want to make sure you check all that out when you're going through there. Now, going up and going in there, we got drive shafts. That's right. 2007, 2008 Ford Edge originally were made with a 3-piece drive shaft going to the rear drive axle for those all-wheel drives. They have since replaced it with a 2-piece. Can't get the 3-piece anymore, so if you go to buy a new one and you hear a grinding noise or wobbling, whatever, you want to get underneath there and give her the beans. That's right. Tug and yank on that drive shaft and make sure that it is a good and solid. Those bushings tend to wear out in the bearings, and there really are no bearing replacements for them. You must buy the whole shaft, and we're talking about $300. So if you're looking at it and you feel that noise down there and that thumping while you're driving all-wheel drive, then you know, hey, there's another $300 tab on top of this wonderfully priced $300 Ford Edge, right? So all in all, if we just add up what I just went through, now we're up to about $500 or $600 of work just for that $3,000 used car. It can add up quick, folks. So you want to make sure that you do inspect it properly. You go through the drive shaft, check that out. The RDU, remarkably, over the years, the RDU has been probably the most rock-solid piece of the whole Ford Edge. The rear differential unit, as they call it, RDU, rarely has too many problems, but there have been occasions where the RDUs had to be repaired or replaced. But as a rule, that is very rare that really is happening. And the fluid in that thing, I'll cover the fluids at the end. But going back up, we got the PTU. That's right. If you're buying an all-wheel drive Ford Edge and you got a power transfer unit, PTU as they call it, and you go up there and say it's got whatever miles on it. It can be 50, it can be 150, it can be 200. The thing is, you need to ask the previous owner, have you ever changed the fluid in your PTU? If they tell you no, running sweet, 175,000 miles, never touch the PTU, never change the fluid, walk away. Okay? $1,600 bill to replace that, and it could fail on you the very next day. So, unless you can do it yourself, then it's still a $700 part, and then all your time. So, something you got to pay attention to. The PTU, and I'll cover the fluid, but the PTU is a very weak point on the Ford Edge, pretty much throughout its history. So, but the earlier models, you know, they could grenade on you on occasions, and then you end up with a big bill to fix that. Now, going up through there, we got that transmission, right? Yeah, that transmission is something else. That is a 6F50 transmission, 6-speed transmission. That was a joint venture between GM and Ford, and they both use this transmission, but in different iterations about what they wanted to do. Some use more expensive parts, others use cheaper parts, so it just depends what you're looking for. But the 6F50 transmission, do not believe what Ford says on fluid change intervals. 150,000 miles. After that, every 50 or 100,000. Do not believe it. The 6F50 loves fresh transmission fluid. I ran my Ford Edge 2008 to 285,000 miles on the original transmission when I traded in, running great. How do you do it? I'll cover the fluids here later, but you want to make sure that 6F50 is shifting pretty. And when you do drive it, make sure it's good shifts. If it's starting to give you bumps when you go up in there and it's starting to downshift on you a little bit, acceleration wise, you're going up and down hills, you're having the standard turbine shaft speed sensor issue and the output shaft speed sensor issue, which is called the TSS OSS sensors. Now the 2007 and 2008 are notorious for the TSS and OSS sensor issues. Doesn't mean the transmission is bad, but it is an electronic failure. So therefore, the transmission as a rule should be good. Unless you go and drive it and it's having all sorts of issues, that probably means that person has been slamming that thing into gear and driving it and just getting by. And if they don't address those TSS, OSS sensor issues and they continue to drive it, that transmission may be toast because all the slamming into the gears and everything else. Then walk away from that because you're going to need a new transmission because it can damage the internals if you don't take care of the problem. If you let a problem fester, it's just going to get worse. And this is one case where if you don't fix those sensors, it's just going to get worse. So yeah, new transmission. I think if you buy a used one, $600-800 for a used one. If you buy a refurbished one from Ford, I think we're talking $2,000. And then they also sell new ones for about $2,500 or something like that. So yeah, you got different choices there, but most people aren't going to put a brand new transmission in when you can buy a used one. But then again, you don't know what the used one's going to be like either. So you'll have to go through all that mess and change a bunch of sensors. So you want to make sure that you do go through all that. Now, to hedge your bets, if you do have a transmission like that, buy a 2010 model year Ford Edge transmission, 6F50. That's right. Then you don't have to worry about those issues. They got it fixed. So that's one way you can do it. It'll still work in your Edge, no problem. But the transmission loves fresh fluid, so you want to make sure you keep that going. Axles, as far as the drive axles go, check those and make sure they're not leaking. It may be an axle seal. Generally, I think the axle seal leaks on the driver's side the most, especially in the 2000s, 2008. There was actually a TSB on this exact problem, and they were replacing the drive seals when they're under warranty, and then after warranty you had to pay for it. But there was a TSB on that at one point, noting that the seal was failing, so you can go through that. PTU seals also fail, so you know, going back to that PTU, if you got stuff burping out of the vent tube, all this other stuff, you smell like a natural gas smell, because PTU gear lube is horrendously stinky, and you'll know it when you smell it. And if you see that in the PTU, that's another prime thing you need to know about that PTU, is to walk away again. And that's right, 2007, you want to walk away from that pitfall. But going on up through there, we got the engine. The engine is pretty bulletproof. That Duratec has been around for a while now, and it's pretty solid. A lot of people think, oh my God, it's a grenade waiting to explode. I think there's more of a myth than anything else on there. Although, yes, the water pump is a weak link. But you can avoid that, okay? It's very simple, and it's called maintenance and taking care of it. But yes, the water pump is a weak link. How is it a weak link? Well, Ford designed it with a narrow chain and a single sprocket water pump. It was driving it off of the engine and driving the water pump. Pretty simple. Mount it behind the timing cover. What can go wrong until it leaks and all the coolant goes into the water? Okay, so when you're a used Ford Edge buyer, check the oil. If they change the oil, you're not going to help but check the cap. Make sure there's no creamy peanut butter looking stuff in the cap, but also check the coolant level to make sure that's on the up and up. Check it for running sounds. You can tell a rod knock and a slapping chain and everything else. If in doubt, walk away, folks. If you're not certain, then walk away. There's another car out there. There's another Edge out there, so you can go and take care of that. But as you're going through that, check those levels and make sure it is in good shape. Now, as you're going through that, coolant. Yes, when the Ford Edge was first introduced, 2007-2008, they introduced a coolant that was definitely not good. It was considered corrosive to the engine and the cooling and radiator and everything else. And what they did was they sent out another TSB on that, and they stated, hey, change it over to the dark green Ford Edge coolant. That's right. So if you walk up to the Ford Edge and it's got something in it other than a green, it might have a Peak aftermarket in there, but just keep in mind, if it has the original coolant in there, it's like an orangish yellow, whatever color, and it's not a green, then that means it has the original type coolant that causes corrosion. And that's something you might not want to deal with, because your heater core is going to rot out and burst and leak all over inside, and then you're going to have another issue with your Ford Edge there after you buy it. So something else to be very aware of while you're actually operating and doing everything. Now, going through it, you want to check the maintenance on it, make sure that they did the appropriate maintenance. If they did maintain the PTU, how about the oil? Can they tell you what they used? If they said, hey, I went to Jiffy Lube and I had the oil changed. Well, if they use purely conventional or a semi-synthetic oil, semi-synthetic probably better than conventional, but if they're running, say, I change it every 10,000 miles, walk away again. Yeah, you want to make sure that the oils reflect the frequency of change. So you want to make sure that that is documented, because the oil plays a big part in the water pump, just as the coolant does. How often did they change the coolant? If they say, well, it's 150,000 miles, it's about due for a coolant change. Well, the question you got to ask is, has it been changed before? If they say no, Ford says it's 150,000 miles, walk away. Yeah, you don't want that. One, that water pump relies on that coolant for lubrication. Two, the oil is lubricating the other side of the water pump. That water pump needs lubrication on both sides and not just one. So you want to make sure that everything's in good shape there. AC, you want to check and make sure the AC works. Make sure it's cycling on appropriately and not on and off rapidly, and all the good things that go with that. The other thing is the fans. The fans on the Ford Edge run, and the passenger side runs the AC, or driver's side fan, because there's two of them. The one on the driver's side cools the condenser for the AC. The one on the passenger side is for engine coolant, and then when they're both on, they're both running. Now, they should be like a hurricane. That's right. They should be running full speed. Well, on a hot day when the AC's on, they're both running. If they are not running, check the coolant temps. You want to make sure that it is staying cool in that process. So you want to make sure that you do all that. Just standard other stuff you want to check: age of the battery, air filter if they've ever changed it, things like that that go hand in hand with that. The other thing is spark plugs. Spark plugs. I did a video on that, and then what I call the $5 spark plug can cost you a ton of money. When did they change the spark plugs? If they have not changed them, buyer, before 100,000 miles, they're late. If they say they've never changed them and it's a high mileage, spark plugs can cause a catastrophe in there. They're notorious for burning out coils 2 and 3 on the 2007 and 2008 Ford Edge. Those are the first ones to burn out. But when they burn out, the problem is they sent all the power back to the PCM, and then you end up with a damaged PCM because the spark plugs weren't changed, because of the higher voltage that back fed into them. I did a whole video on this, and you can search that in my YouTube channel. But the PCM gets damaged. Now, thankfully, the PCM can get repaired. There's a lot of places you can send it to. If you go to my Facebook group, you will find out who we recommend to be sent to, and they have, without a doubt, fixed it every time, and people are happy. But if you run across a rough running engine, and there's all sorts of codes, things going on, more than likely the 2007 and 2008 had a bad PCM issue for this. So $250, I think, to repair a PCM, vice buying a new one from Ford. So you can repair it. Not a big deal if that's all that it is. But some of the pitfalls you want to worry about on that aspect. Now, going back through everything else, check the battery, how old it is, and we'll tell you that a lot of issues can materialize through the Ford Edge if the battery is not up to charge. The Ford Edge, especially in later years, is a power-hungry beast. It needs power. It demands power, and if there's not enough power going through the system, it will start acting goofy. So you got to make sure that battery's in good shape. I always recommend an AGM battery to replace your standard lead-acid battery because they deliver more deep cycles and, of course, more power that you will need for your Edge and will last longer as a general rule. Now, other things you want to make sure you check is the power steering. That's right, power steering. You want to make sure that fluid's been changed. What color is the power steering? It is red because it uses the same transmission fluid as the Ford Edge 6F50 for those model years, 2007 through 2008. You have to make sure you cover that, and then you'll be done. You'll be set. You go through all of this that I've outlined on here, the fans, most notable failure points of overheating. Fans, easy, $225 in 9 minutes of your time, and you got a new fan. It's that simple. But overall, the Edge, the engine is bulletproof, except for that water pump. A lot of other issues may come about. Oil pressure switch, real big problem if you got a leak. But it's $5, and it takes you probably 20 minutes to change just because you got to contort your hands. Take the oil filter off, you can probably get at it. But the oil pressure switch is a known leaking thing. Just got to be careful you don't over torque it and break your block. Yeah, a little tad bit there. Now the TSS, OSS sensors are also something you can DIY in there. But you go to the MACTFORDEDGE Facebook group and you'll see all the help you could ever want and need as far as getting the job done yourself. Transmission range sensors sometimes fail in that 6F50. So it may be a little more involved. Valve bodies sometimes are getting worn out because they're getting aged, folks. That's right, these cars are getting old, so those valve bodies are there. And then last but not least, maybe, just maybe, the shift solenoid system may have to be replaced, but that's pretty rare. It's usually just a TSS, maybe a TRS. Sometimes you just have to reprogram and clear the adaptive tables so that it can redo its shift strategies on that 6F50 transmission. There was virtually no Ford Edge Sport made. They're all 3.5s for the 2007 and 2008. All-wheel drive or front-wheel drive. Okay, all-wheel drive and front-wheel drive use the same 6F50 transmission. Just have a little bit of a PTU and a drive shaft issue they work around there. So you can get the power to where you need it. As far as anything else goes in there, pretty standard and reliable Edge. You shouldn't have any problems. Now, as far as the fluids go for the 2007, 2008 Ford Edge, make sure you change the fluids. Oils, change them frequently. That's right. Use a good synthetic oil to keep that varnish from happening. And I would recommend, if you're city driving a lot, 250 hours or roughly about 3,000 to 6,000 miles, depending on what your city driving and severe driving conditions are. If you got a lot of city driving, high idle, I'd recommend about 3,000 to 4,000 miles to change the oil. If you're using synthetic, you might be able to bump it up to about 5 and not have a problem. PTU fluid. holds 11.5 ounces. Do not believe anybody else you watch on YouTube that says it holds a quart. It does not hold a quart. It's 11.5 ounces, which is less than a 12-ounce soda can, and that's all it holds. That's why you want to change that fluid in there, because imagine that's getting up to 217, 250 degrees, sitting right next to that catalytic converter. That oil's being cooked literally. So you want to change that out every 10,000 miles. And some people drill holes in the bottom of the PTU case in order to take and make the facilitation of it, but you just suck it out, whatever you do. But 10,000 miles, folks, that's what you want to change that PTU fluid out to be. Transmission, you want to aim for about a 30,000 mile transmission changer every 2 years. That's right, you want to keep that transmission fluid on that 6F50 fresh. That 6F50 loves fresh transmission fluid. Many people have gone many miles, and when they change it, oh, it shifts better. Of course it does. It's got new fluid in it. And it does love new fluid because everything flows better, and therefore it shifts better. So make sure you do that. As far as the coolant, no more than 30,000 miles on your coolant, folks. You got to protect that water pump. You want to do that 30,000 miles and no more than 2 years. Give it a good 2 or 3 flushes on that. Get the old stuff out. If you're like me and maintain it like that, then 2 will do it. If it's the first time, do a complete flush of that stuff. Get all that out of there. Use something like a Prestone flush. Clean it out. Use distilled water. Once you get that all out, then buy the concentrate, because you're going to have about 50% water left in there. Dump the concentrate in there until it's full, and then let it run, and you do a measurement. You should just be about at that 50-50 mix. Pretty simple thing, but that new coolant will help lubricate that water pump, and that's really what you want to aim for. So in doing that, you're going to make sure that you keep your edge running good. Power steering fluid, change that when you change the transmission fluid. That's right, keep that power steering happy. You can use Mercon V in it. That's what Ford recommends, but I have been using Valvoline Max Life ATF Mercon VLV rated fluid in my power steering on my edges, and I have never had an issue with them. So you can use that as an option without any problems, and it will run perfectly fine for you. But as far as the Ford Edge, some of the good things about it is that it is a good, spacious vehicle to drive it. It's excellent on the highway. The engine has enough power to get you where you gotta go, and for a V6 naturally aspirated engine, it's got plenty of power to do what you need to do. I prefer the front-wheel drive with snow tires in the winter all the way around. It gets me through any snowstorm I'm going through. There might be some places that all-wheel drive might be beneficial, but for me, overall, that's the other thing. One thing I forgot to tell you about. We have the tone rings. Yeah, those rings that tell the speed sensors how fast you go. A lot of times those tone rings will crack, and you want to make sure if you got a traction control issue, generally those tone rings are going to be broken, and you have to replace the entire the entire axle. That's right. They sell it as one piece, so you have to buy the entire axle in order to get rid of that. So that's one of the things that is a problem with that, with the tone ring, because you can't just buy a tone ring. And that's another thing that is always complained about. Sometimes the compasses don't work, and they don't go around and around, and they point north because they want to go back to Canada. I don't know. That's irrelevant in my point. Audio controls, my Ford Touch and all that stuff, Sirius satellite radio, whatever. They all seem to work pretty good in there. Cruise control I never had a problem with in the 2008. But overall, when I retired mine and traded in, it was 285,000 miles, and it was still running the original water pump, original transmission, had a TSS OSS failure, and then I went through a series of wheel bearings and strut mounts, but other than that, one oxygen sensor. That was it. Pretty reliable, not a big deal. So the Ford Edge 2000, 2007, 2008 is a good deal as long as you mind your P's and Q's and do a good check on it. Now, it doesn't mean it won't break tomorrow after you buy it, but do due diligence. and you should have a decent Ford Edge to drive. And this is Mac T Ford Edge, and of course, like and subscribe on the YouTube channel. Make sure you join Mac T Ford Edge on Facebook. Go to MACTGarage.com where you can get all your parts information on your Ford Edges. Make sure you listen to the music from Band of One. And my feet hit the floor today. I'm having a great day, and I want you to have a great day too. And Mercy Girl's got a couple of one-liners for you.
Thank you for watching Mac T's videos, and remember to like and subscribe. This is a Mercy Go production.